Hello, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Stephen Hodgson, and I'm the head of publishing at AMEB. I'm very happy to be here today to launch the brand new AMEB Tuba and AMEB Trombone and Euphonium technical workbooks and orchestral excerpts books, along with one of the technical work consultants for the project, Greg Aitken. During this online launch, Greg and I will talk a little bit about what's in these new technical work and orchestral excerpts books, a little bit about the construction of the new technical work, as well as talking through the major changes from the old technical work. Finally, we'll summarize the orchestral excerpts section of the books with some details about the changes and additions to the euphonium orchestral excerpts that will hopefully make life a little easier for teachers and students undertaking grade 5 to grade 8 euphonium exams. Finally, if you have any questions throughout the course of this launch, please feel free to type them into the chat and we'll do our very best to answer them at the end if time permits. As many of you may know, the Lower Brass Technical work was last reviewed in 2004. Following the release of the new Trumpet Syllabus last year, that's Trumpet Syllabus gradebooks and technical work, AMEB wanted to review the technical work for the trombone, bass trombone, euphonium and tuba syllabuses as a matter of urgency, bringing them into line with the new streamlined trumpet technical work. We have been very privileged to work with two consultants in putting this new technical work together, Greg Aitken, who is with us today, and Brendan Collins, Chief Brass Examiner for AMEB New South Wales, and former Associate Principal Trombone with Opera Australia, who comes with a wealth of performance, teaching and composing experience in Australia and internationally. So before going any further, I'd like to introduce Greg Aitken, Lower Brass Technical Work Consultant and our guest today. Greg is well known throughout Australia as a performer, educator and conductor. He held the post of Head of Brass at the Queensland Conservatorium of Music up until 2017, having taught at a tertiary level in Brisbane for almost 30 years. He has performed with the Queensland and Adelaide Symphony Orchestras, as well as various touring music productions, while also performing in brass bands nationally and internationally, including with the world famous Grimethorpe Colliery Band as part of their Australian tour in 2001. Greg is founder of the brass quintet Bob, Best of Brass, which has toured extensively for the Musica Viva in Schools program and has commissioned several works from Australian composers. Greg is also the owner of the Brass Music Specialists stores at Graceville in Brisbane, which he co-founded in 1989. Welcome, Greg. Thank you so much for being here and for your tireless work on the new Lower Brass Technical work, which really began halfway through last year.
Thanks very much, Stephen. It's a privilege to be here, and it's been a challenge and a rewarding, very satisfying activity being involved with this project.
Thank you so much. I'd like to give everyone a bit of a background to this new release. We were aware of some complications with AMEB's Lower Brass Technical work, and these have been compounded by the fact that the old AMEB Lower Brass Technical workbook refers to additional third-party publications, Arbon Method, Blažević, Clef Studies, Eric Clay, etc., some of which have been released in new editions so that the page numbers listed in the AMEB book no longer refer to the correct items. Additionally, it's been a long-term vision for the AMEB to align our brass syllabuses as much as possible, obviously given the differences between the instruments. And the new technical work is an important step towards this goal. At the end of 2019, we released the new Trumpet Syllabus with the intention that the technical work for this syllabus would serve as a model for the other brass instruments. This new technical work saw the abolition of scale sets, a reduced number of key centers studied per grade, supplemented with a small number of technical exercises, starting really with basic lip slurs in level 1 and introducing double tonguing, triple tonguing, and so forth in the upper grades. This was a pattern we wanted to continue through the lower brass syllabuses. And given these conditions, that the new technical work had to be more streamlined and straightforward to teach and examine, and had also to be linked with the new trumpet technical work, can you tell us a little bit about how you started sketching out the technical work for the lower brass syllabuses?
Yes, thank you, Stephen. I think most teachers, anyone who's had trombone students in particular, studying the technical work, particularly from grade 5 onwards, but making it sequential from the beginning was our challenge. As you mentioned earlier, the third-party publications, Arvin, Blažević, those ones that come in later life, they're still essential resources and should certainly not be overlooked. But I think that the challenge was to make the requirement in the exam context such that it was not just so daunting that it consumed most of the time in the examination. So just to be clear, we want to study those fundamental areas, all the different technical elements. We've got our lip slurs, we've got our scale work, we've got tonguing, single, double, all those kind of things, alternate positions, and we have certainly not tried to minimise the importance of those elements. But what we've done is, as I say, particularly in the level 2 and beyond, is to incorporate those so that the students will still work on those different elements. But in the preliminary through to grade 4, we introduce those elements and then they continue, hopefully in what's a more sequential manner than was previously the case.
Sure. But in terms of a process of starting to create a new technical work for the instruments, what was the process? How did we begin sketching out all of the material?
Okay, so Brendan and myself, both being trombone players primarily, we had a look at some of the perhaps shortcomings. Previously, teachers of trombone would be aware that scale centers like A major, for example, or a B minor, these ones for young trombonists with not fully developed arms are problematic due to not being able to reach 7th position. So it's a compromise. Do we go for better intonation with stretching too far, and then that's at the expense of sound quality? These kind of things. With the euphonium, we're probably only having 3 valves at this stage, quite possibly, not assuming anything, but those smaller students in particular we had in mind when we selected key centers and some of the technical work so that it was not too demanding on particularly young students. Here in Queensland now we have a system where we're starting brass players in grade 3 in a lot of cases. Now these young students have not physically developed to a point where they can extend to the outer positions on the trombone in particular. So those kind of things played a lot in our thinking. And as I say, we started with those elementary things, the lip slurs, things that are fundamental to making a good sound, good airflow, good tone production. Those kind of things were fundamental in our thinking, and we developed from there.
So really starting by thinking about what can a student at that stage achieve with the instruments they're likely to have, with their own physicality, depending on how far they can reach with a trombone slide, et cetera, exactly. And sketching out a set of ranges, which really informed everything else.
That's right. And with the introduction of the preliminary grades, you'll see in the new books that these are very fundamental. It's entry-level stuff to hopefully encourage more and more students to engage with the AMEB process, that they get that sense of reward they've accomplished without the challenge being set too high.
Now, I remember there was a lot of discussion about which keys would go into which grades. We came up with a giant table sort of mapping out which key centers would be studied in each grade. How did you go about deciding which keys were right for each grade?
Well, that was a challenge. The teachers of brass would be familiar with band repertoire where we're starting in the flat keys. For trombone players, the B flat scale, we've got to reach 6th position, and that's common material. We're playing a lot in B flat major, it might be F major, E flat major, those first flat keys, and so we started there. And with the trombone in particular, we tried to avoid, as I mentioned earlier, those outer positions, particularly 7th, to try and bring that. You'll see that it's not till grade 3 now that you actually need the 7th position in the trombone book. So we've tried throughout all of the scales to make sure that every key center is covered. Some get covered more than once, but there's also the requirement from level 2 onwards, the scales are in 2 octaves. So there's that extension in the level 2 section. In level 1, you might see some of those scales, but they're only for 1 octave. We'll talk a little bit later about the tuba with the range, but we've tried to keep it within the range as specified. Euphoniums, trombones, there's always going to be a certain element of compromise where it's not going to be exactly perfect for everybody. And we have kept that in mind as best as possible and tried to cut the cloth to fit, as it were.
Great. So each grade has a limited number of key signatures. As I said, we've done away with the scale sets.
Yes.
And really, you're given at the top end four key signatures, and you study the major and minor scales and arpeggios associated with those, and the dominant and diminished sevenths that fit in with those key signatures also. At the very beginning, just studying a major scale, a major arpeggio, and alongside these, there are these technical exercises. So from grade 2, all of the scales and arpeggios have to be memorized, which is the same as the previous syllabus. But in preliminary and grade 1, candidates can read from the book.
That's right.
So just talking a little bit more about the technical exercises, these are really intended to address technical aspects that can't be examined through scales and arpeggios alone. Can you tell us a little bit about how these were selected and what kind of technical exercises appear, especially in the early grades?
Well, as you mentioned earlier, we've tried to keep in alignment to some extent with what was in the Trumpet Technical book, and Phil Ryan, who's done that one, has used the Clark second study, which 99% of brass players and teachers would be familiar with. Those first 5 or so degrees of the scale, and using it in the key centers associated with the grade. So that simple scalic study, doing it tongued, doing it slurred, not extending the range. As we move through, the tempo increases slightly, but those fundamental things, I mean, we're all playing scales. It's a well-known, well-established brass exercise. It's universal, and we thought that was a good place to start.
Yeah. So the lip slurs really go through all of level 1, and they double a bit as a warm-up as well as a technical exercise to show how students are progressing. Towards level 2, and this has caused some consternation in the past, there's quite a few skills that need to be tested for lower brass, a few more than for trumpet, for instance. And in order to achieve this and make it a little bit more streamlined for examination, the decision was made to incorporate these into one technical exercise. So really you have your scales and arpeggios covering 4 key signatures, for instance, in grades 5 and 6. And then just one technical exercise which addresses maybe double tonguing, different clefs, looking at different slide, alternative slide positions, etc., etc. Who wrote the exercises?
Well, these exercises are terrific, and they've been composed by Brendan Collins, who was my partner in crime for this whole adventure. You mentioned the slurring, referring back to the earlier grades. The lip slur, as is pointed out in the trumpet book, is one of the fundamental brass techniques, and it's ongoing throughout life. Now, as we go into the upper grades, you'll see that those lip slurs are still incorporated, and again, they're of a more challenging nature. But the compositions that Brendan's come up with, I'm pretty sure teachers are going to fall in love with these. They're a terrific little, like a smorgasbord of all the techniques we need. So I'll have a look at this one in a moment, but you'll see those different elements. You've got your lip slurring, as I mentioned, some double tonguing, some interval work. There's legato tonguing, alternate positions, as you mentioned a moment ago. And he's brought these in, and with each exercise, there's a little paragraph, bullet points at the top. These are the aspects that we're looking for when we're in the examination situation. As I mentioned at the outset, the other books, the Blazevich, the Arben, the Edwards, all the other technical books which we've had forever are still crucial for good brass fundamentals and good brass instruction. But it's not practical to examine an Arben, a Blazevich, a blah, blah, blah in an exam context. So our concept is to bring elements into the one exercise, and they're interesting to play, they're melodic, they're challenging, and I think they're very rewarding. So my congratulations to Brendan on these. They're terrific.
Fantastic. Now, you mentioned that you will play a couple of these for us. Just to give an example, would you like to play a couple of the exercises just to show what they're all about?
Okay, sure. So this first one is the grade 5 trombone technical exercise. Components we're looking for are slurring, double tonguing, there's some tenor clef, and some alternate positions. So, Brendan, this is for you.
Thank you very much. So that was the grade 5 technical exercise for trombone, and that's it in terms of technical exercises. It's that and the scales and arpeggios, and that's the technical work for that grade. Did you mention you might play the grade 6 one as well?
Yeah, so this one will be the grade 6 exercise, and you'll see that those same elements are here, our slurring, double tonguing, alternate positions, and then there's more alternate positions, there's more tenor clef, the range is starting to increase. So being a trombone player, Brendan's gradually pushed the bar a little higher. So you'll hear some of those elements, I'm sure.
That's great. Thank you so much for that. And so the idea is not only to combine these technical aspects to give an idea to the examiner of where the candidate's at, but also to bridge the divide between technical work and real music. And these exercises really have a sense of being really idiomatic, the kind of thing that you might come across in an orchestral part or a brass band part, or actually in solo works as well. So it's a really great way of crossing that divide and bringing it into sharp focus, that you're not just studying these things as a bizarre esoteric technical exercise. Once we put all of this material together, so you know the grade scales and arpeggios were decided, and the technical exercises were really mapped out. We sent it out to a number of specialist teachers for a review, and this includes Matthew Van Emmerich, Will Farmer, Brad Lucas, and Brett Page for the trombone and euphonium book, and Heather McWilliams and Per Forsberg for the tuba book. At this point, I would really like to extend many thanks from AMEB to all of the reviewers for their valuable feedback. A number of changes were made subsequent to that process, and of course the books have benefited significantly from a broader input for the specialist teachers working every day in teaching those instruments. When we started typesetting all of this material, we quickly realized that we wouldn't be able to fit it into a single book, not trombone, bass trombone, euphonium, and tuba. It simply became too big to be practical. So the lower brass technical work is now printed in 2 books, one for tuba and one which combines trombone, bass trombone, and euphonium. Another very new thing about this release is the addition of a preliminary grade. This is intended to be the very first step in a brass player's journey, and is an entirely new grade for the trombone, tuba, and euphonium syllabuses. Could you let us know what kind of things go into the preliminary technical work?
Yeah, so what we've focused on with the preliminary, Yes, we're having a first look at the scale, and the preliminary, we're only playing the first 5 degrees of the major scale, and keeping it very simple in crotchets. And in keeping with the trumpet technical book, we've also got just one simple lip slur. And with the trombone, we're using the corresponding slide positions and the euphonium corresponding fingering to that of the trumpet book. The tuba was a little bit different. With the trombone, the euphonium, and the trumpet, we've kept them fairly well aligned. And those lip slur exercises as they go through are very similar. The tuba, however, was a different beast. And this time we've really tackled tuba and separated the 4 different pitch tubas. So they've each got their own page or their own range or their own lip slur. So talking with the consultants, they felt that the open 5th slur of the tuba was crucial to make sure that we've got that open harmonic. That open 5th is good, showing good tone, good air, that slur is, and it is, as the grade suggests, a fundamental in the preliminary area. So we've stuck to that. So that's a slight variation, the tuba to the others. And as you carry through with the tuba, you'll see there's more focus on the lower harmonics rather than the trombone euphonium tuba, trombone euphonium trumpet moving up the range. The tuba is staying in that low range where it's obviously more important for that instrument.
Thanks. We do have a page of the preliminary technical requirements, which will flash up on screen. So this is it for preliminary trombone and euphonium, just a B flat major scale and triad, just the first 5th. And you can see that basic lip slur, G to D, and that's it. That's all they need to prepare. Again, at preliminary, they can read the music for, the candidates can read the music for both the scales and the technical exercise, but from grade 2 onwards, the scales and arpeggios have to be performed from memory, but candidates can read from the music for the technical exercises. And of course, we've introduced manual lists for the repertoire component of a preliminary exam, with a view to releasing a series of lower brass grade books in the very near future, which will of course have a preliminary book to support that grade. What kinds of material is in the preliminary manual lists?
The preliminary was quite a challenge. Having just done the manual list only in the last couple of years for each instrument, we'd exhausted pretty much the repertoire. But I'm really excited that we were able to get Craig Ross, Australian composer, on board, and he's written some specific technical aspects for preliminary that are just first rate. Can I also mention, you said about the memory versus the reading. In the past, that's been somewhat confusing. I think maybe in the syllabus it said all from memory, and then in the technical book said may be read. Just to be clear now, that the dominant diminished 7ths when we move up are just the arpeggio. There's nothing to read. There's no Arban patterns. There's none of that confusion. Yes, it's all from memory from grade 2 onwards, and it's spelling out the arpeggios, which I think is a terrific amendment. But yeah, getting back to the point, the preliminary, it's got to be a comfortable engagement for those elementary players just engaging with AMEB. That's been our focus, to get materials and technical work that they can ease into without any great stress or strain.
So quite limited range, simple rhythms, and a sort of comfortable entry point. There's the studies from Craig Ross, little pieces based on various Australian animals, but there's also been sourced a bunch of material from a number of popular books and popular methods that are in those preliminary lists as well. That's all available on the new syllabus. The rest of the manual lists and publications remain the same for the syllabus. They were revised a few years back by yourself, Greg, so thank you for that. Just to make it clear, for this release, we're receiving new technical work, and then the preliminary manual lists are the really new thing. So as we mentioned earlier, in the earliest grades of tuba, there's a bit of an issue in that candidates could have a tuba in B flat, C, E flat, or F, all of which have quite different ranges and quite different requirements, especially at that early grade. So could we talk a little bit about how we've accommodated the different tubas in the technical work, particularly in preliminary and grade 1?
Yeah, so what I mentioned earlier, there's a separate entry for each of the keyed tubas. So the C tuba has its own range, its own exercise with the same fingering or its own fingering, and so on moving through. And as we move up, again, I think from 4th grade, in the old days, the range was quite extensive. So if you were a B flat tuba player, it was probably too high. If you're an E flat tuba player, maybe it was too low. We didn't accommodate so much for the C or F tuba in terms of the earlier grades, showing the fingering and showing the actual technical requirements. So all that has been spelled out from preliminary through to grade 4. There's a separate entry for each tuba, and then from level 2, grade 5 onwards, is where the range becomes common. And I hope that will be more palatable to different key tuba players. But there's a really good paragraph or introduction to those exercises which says teachers and students should pick the repertoire to their strengths. So it's not going to be perfect for everybody, but we do hope there's enough in there that everybody will be able to make a selection appropriate to their requirements to show their strengths. If this piece goes too high, then hopefully there's another one that does not, etc., etc. So I think that's a really big breakthrough for the tuba syllabus in particular.
So level 2, the tuba range has become generalized, and all tubas have the same range expressed in the technical workbook, but it really is a generalized range, and it governs all of the technical work for the grade, but repertoire, of course, needs to be selected according to the instrument you're playing, and the same with orchestral excerpts. There's orchestral excerpts clearly designed for the lower pitched tubas and clearly designed for the upper pitched tubas, and it's really a matter of teachers selecting the exercises and repertoire that are going to work for that student. So I think we've got a page of the preliminary tuba technical work here, and you can see each tuba has its own separate range: tuba in B flat, tuba in C, tuba in E flat, and tuba in F. And accordingly, each tuba has to play a different scale, which is going to make that scale as comfortable for that tuba as possible. The lip slur exercise as well is adjusted. So each tuning of tuba has its own page in preliminary, running through the various exercises in the key that tuba tuning has to approach. So hopefully this will make the syllabus more approachable for tuba players on all instruments from the very beginning. Now, in producing 2 separate books, one for tuba and one for trombone and euphonium, it did give us the opportunity to incorporate orchestral excerpts into the book, just like we did for trumpet, so that teachers and students don't need to purchase additional resources to fulfill the List D orchestral excerpts requirement for grades 5 to 8. This is a selection of excerpts previously published in the AMEB Brass Orchestral Excerpts book, which was released in 2004. But in order to simply fit these all into a book, we've removed some of the least played excerpts. So some of the excerpts we very rarely hear in an examination have been removed just to make enough space to fit it all in one book. Although these excerpts that were removed are still acceptable for examination if that's your favorite excerpt. In preparing these excerpts, we once again went back to original sources, text editions and reliable orchestral parts, and reproofed everything from the ground up. So hopefully these will reflect exactly the parts as you may encounter them in an orchestral setting. Now, with the euphonium, we've tried to alleviate a number of issues that we were aware of with the orchestral excerpts in this new book. Firstly, we've added a selection of new excerpts in bass clef, especially in grades 5 and 6. And these include excerpts from Holst's first and second suites for military band, some additional excerpts from Mahler symphonies, and some from Henry Wood's Fantasia on British Sea Songs. The B-flat treble clef excerpts from Holst's The Planets do remain, as these are central to the orchestral euphonium players' repertoire, and provide an excellent opportunity for players that might want to learn to read treble clef as a transposing B-flat instrument. However, there are now enough bass clef options in grades 5, 6, and 7 that players can fulfill the requirement without reading treble clef. Importantly, all of the bass clef excerpts are now in C, reflecting what a modern player is likely to encounter in an orchestra. Previously, of course, some of these excerpts were in bass clef in B flat because they were originally written for tenor tuba, I believe. And that is the way that you may encounter them in some contexts, but really a modern euphonium part is likely to be in C if it is written in bass clef. So we've made sure that all of the bass clef excerpts appear in C. Before we go, there have been a few questions that have been sent through via the chat. So thank you very much for everybody for that. We'll do our best to answer these now. Firstly, are the technical exercises able to be presented in the exam from memory? Yes, absolutely. If that is what you would like to do, you can present the exercises. You can present everything from memory if you wish. There's just no requirement. So scales and arpeggios from grade 2 onwards do have to be from memory, but the technical exercises, there is the option to present those from the music, just to take a little bit of pressure off anybody who doesn't feel so comfortable preparing that sort of thing from memory. What else have we got? So will the first grade trombone studies be fixed from C major to B flat major, such as tonguing study, legato study, and articulation study? Greg, I'm not sure what that means.
No, I'm a little confused. I'm suspecting, so the question is, will we play them tongued, slurred, or legato? Is that the gist of the question?
Will the first grade trombone studies be fixed from C major to B flat major?
Fixed from C major to B. Yes, because the existing one, the transposition's incorrect. So yes, they have been fixed. Yes.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that. And I think that's it for the questions from everyone. So thank you for sending those through. Thanks, Greg, for demystifying that for me. Really, that concludes our AMEB Tuba and AMEB Trombone, Bass Trombone and Euphonium Technical Workbook launch. The syllabus and all publications are available at your local music shop via ameb.edu.au and via other online sheet music retailers. Thank you once again to the technical work consultants for the Lower Brass Technical work, Greg Aitken and Brendan Collins, and the other contributors to the books, specialist reviewers Matthew Van Eberich, Will Farmer, Brad Lucas, Brett Page, Heather McWilliams and Per Forsberg, proof players Karina Philippi, Elijah Cornish, and again Matthew Van Emerich, the proofreading and editing team, and AMEB typesetter David Howell. Thanks also to behind the scenes AMEB team, Jeff Higgins, Leah Phillips, and Alana Caldwell for their work in making this online launch possible. To the AMEB CEO, Bernard De Pasquale, and the other AMEB staff for their support. And last but certainly not least, to everyone who has attended this launch. We hope that these two new technical work and orchestral excerpts books, one for tuba and one for trombone and euphonium, as well as the new preliminary grade, serve the lower brass community as a useful and inspiring resource for years to come. Thank you so much again, and goodbye.